Alright, so welcome everybody to another edition of our OPTCG University. We're doing another lecture today. Last time, of course, I made a big piece about deck building, and it was a very fun for me to make, both in the slides and just in the reaction and the creation of it. So we're back here again, and last time we talked about deck building, and so this time I want to talk to you guys about turn order in the One Piece card game. So we're going to discuss about the decision whether to go first or to go second in any given game of One Piece that you play. And I'm hoping to definitely bring more lectures like this to you about high-level topics in the future. So this episode is brought to you by one of our subscribers, Senior B Ballin, or Mr. Debaser231. Appreciate it. He asked the question of why is it so important for Black to go second as our university question of the week. And so I wanted to expand on that a little bit and not just talk about why it's important for Black to go second, but why it's important for any deck to prefer whatever turn order it prefers in the game, right? Alright, so the turn order decision is something that's actually a big deal in One Piece. In a lot of card games, the option of whether to go first or second is a very clear and straightforward one. In games like Magic the Gathering and Duel Masters, you just always want to go second. Getting the first attack and the first land production is way more important than anything else, right? But in this game, there is actually a real decision to be made. Because of the unique Dawn system, where the person going first starts on an odd number of Dawn, namely he goes 1, 3, 5, and the person going second is on an even number of Dawn the whole time, namely 2, 4, 6. It changes how you play the game based on both how your deck is built, and it changes what you choose as well at the start of every game, depending on what cards are in your deck. So there is not only just the Dawn, but there's a lot of other things that can go into effect in this card game with the decision of whether to go first or second, right? Turn order often decides who is the aggressor in any particular game. Going first means you have the ability to attack your opponent's life first. You're going to be the first player allowed to attack. But going second has the hidden ability of you're the first player who gets to attack characters. So you can always attack rested characters, but going first usually means that you're the person who is going to be resting their characters first, and it gives your opponent the option to try and clear the board and rather shoot to play for a longer game where they will have more creatures on board than the opponent and can starve your opponent of resources. And, going first allows you to be the aggressor by attacking leader first and trying to force your opponent to be inefficient with their resources by defending life with their cards in hand rather than potentially casting those cards and beating you to death with them. So this is, of course, a large concept, and it's hard to talk about in a very round and generic sense. So I figured we'd go through all of basically the top meta competing decks, and I'm going to talk to you about what turn I believe they would prefer to start and why. So to give an example here. So for example here we have Zoro. Zoro is a deck that wants to go first. It almost always wants to go first because of its aggressive creatures. It has not only a lot of one-cost creatures that are super important, like Buggy and Nami. Of course, there's also Makino, Magra, Dadan, Izo. Or not Dadan. Dadan finds one cost. It's Makino, Magra, Otama. Right? But it has a bunch of other odd-costed cards as well, like 3-cost Zoro and 5-cost Marco. And your goal is to attack your opponent's leader as much as possible. You are mostly going to be ignoring a lot of things that are going on their board just because you're going to make more attacks than your opponent, period. So sending most of them at your leader is going to starve them out of a lot of cards and run them out of resources of cards to play. Though there is an exception where, as Zoro, you do often still want to take away going second from both the Law matchup and the Yellow matchup, where you want to put your yellow opponent off of 10-drop Big Mom, and you want to keep the Law off of extra potential cards. So here we have Law, of course, right? And Law is the deck that always wants to go second. You always want to go second because every single Dawn and every single card is valuable in this deck. You're basically a combo deck of sorts where your combo pieces are very interchangeable. It is true. You don't need any specific card. You just need step 1 of the combo is a full board. Step 2 of the combo is, you know, a big green card and a small red card, or a big red card and a small green card. And step 3 is rinse and repeat, right? So going second in this deck, what's most important, honestly, often is the fact that you draw an extra card. So having access to 6 cards at the start of the game, and basically 7 too, because you're always going to take the first attack from your opponent at your life just to gain extra cards. And having 2 also lets you fill the board faster, so you can get to 5 characters and activate your leader ability as fast as possible. So next we have Doflamingo. Doflamingo is one of the decks that just always wants to go first. In pretty much any and every matchup, you want to go first. You want to be the one putting pressure on your opponent's life total. Because your leader ability costs 3, it's super important to activate it as soon as possible. And the insane draws this deck can have of turn 1 Perona into turn 2 with 3 Dawn, activate leader ability, put a 4-drop into play, is sometimes too much pressure for any deck to deal with, and they just immediately fall behind after that and can never catch back up. You, of course, also have a big odd-cost bombs like Sogeking and Mihawk that you want to play on curve as often as possible. So going first helps there, meaning you'll be the first person to 7, and then you'll be the first person to 9, and you'll just be able to tap out on each one of your turns to get as much damage and value out of your opponent and tempo them out of the game into an early victory. Alright, so next we have Whitebeard here. Whitebeard is one of the things that's kind of split into 2 camps, where if you're playing a Straw Hat focused version of the deck, what we call Strawbeard, you usually want to go first. You want to be on the play. And if you're playing the slower version of the deck, the Whitebeard Pirates version of the deck, you usually want to go second. So the Straw Hat Crew version of the deck has cards like Nico Robin, you have a 5-drop Luffy, and both versions of the deck have access to 7-drop Ace. So the Straw Hat version is more aggressive with more rush characters to try and put pressure on the opponent's life early and often with 6k leader. And the slower version of the deck with bigger bodies plays a higher even cost number of characters like Speed Jill and Thatch. And even cards like Vasa, the 2-cost Whitebeard blocker. So next we have Kinemon. Kinemon is one of the decks that definitely always wants to go second in every scenario. The leader ability reduces the cost of a 3-drop down to 2. So if you're going second, it means you can play a 3-drop on 2 into potentially playing a 5-drop on 4, or playing a second 3-drop for 2 and activating say a Momo or a Bonnie and getting that much value that way. So having this getting this early cost decrease on really strong cards like Okiku and Raizo and 4-cost Yamato really allows the Kinemon deck to build a lot of tempo as well and pressure the opponent's life total in a way early that means that your life total isn't under too much threat while you build up your board and outgrind them out of the game in the long run. So Magellan is definitely a deck that always wants to go first in every situation. The ideal curve that Magellan can have of these 3 cards into one another, turn 1 Hannibal, into turn 2 with 3 Don Sadie, into turn 3 with 5 Don Magellan. If you have that curve, it's almost impossible for this deck to lose. You'll basically be putting your opponent down a Don and turning them basically into having gone first. But they'll be missing out on 1 attack, and you'll be able to constantly pressure them with your early 6k leader swings. Your deck also just has a high number of odd cost cards outside of these 3 main combo cards, such as Queen, and sometimes cards like 9-drop Rush starter deck Kaido. So next we have the black decks in Rob Lucci and Smoker. So these decks definitely usually want to go second, but there are a few scenarios such as versus Zoro and Whitebeard where you'll prefer to go first. So the deck usually wants to go second because currently with the low card pool that black has, there's a huge amount of even cost characters. You have Brand New on 2, you have Kuzan and Borsellino on 4, Sakazuki on 6, and you also have Isho on 8. And all of these cards are really powerful, and you want to be able to play them as early as possible. However, there are some matchups where going first can be advantageous still. For example, against Zoro, the deck is just so fast and aggressive that you have to take an attack away from them by going first. And against Whitebeard, you want to make sure you always have an additional Don left over to attach to your leader to swing. So being on the odd Don train is better because you can play your even cost card, have a Don left over, and still attack the Whitebeard leader for 6 to pressure their hand before it gets too large and out of control. So next we have Kuro. And Kuro is a deck that usually wants to go first. In many situations they want to go first, but they usually still want to take second away from yellow decks and law decks. Now Kuro has puts a lot into having early pressure. You have cards like Sham on 3 that lets you put out a Butchie for free, and early Django on curve for 5 Don, letting you attack for 5 multiple times in a turn potentially, is very powerful. Krieg, of course, is one of those cards that is a 6 cost, but is a card you rarely have the ability to actually play successfully on turn 6 for value. So it's better to save it in the later turns where you can play Krieg and still attach some Don to attack with your other characters in play afterwards. However, you always want to take Big Mom off of having their 10-drop on curve, and getting the extra turn to attack Law's characters and not their leader. Also, it really helps in the Law matchup. Alright, so next we have Ace. Ace is definitely a deck that usually wants to go first, especially now that the restrictions have gone through, restricting Blocker Marco, 9-drop Newgate, and Radical Beam. You just want to use your aggressive odd-costed cards to put a lot of pressure on the opponent. You have Buggy on 1. You, of course, have 5-cost Marco and a pair of 7-drops that are now your main win conditions against decks, now that you don't have access to multiple Whitebeards anymore. And since it's tough to use the ability defensively sometimes, putting pressure on the opponent early and making it tough for them to play around cards like Flame Emperor, and even having access to more odd-costed removal cards like Fire Fist, allows this deck to get some chip shots in early that it can then close out in the late game with a lot of value and powerful events. So Arlong is a deck that definitely always wants to go first. With Arlong, you want to activate your leader ability as soon as possible and put in some powerful trigger cards. Plus, your biggest boss monster is a 7-drop. So you want to be able to play that on curve as often as possible, since you don't have access to the even cost big mom cards such as 8-drop Katakuri and 10-drop Big Mom. So going first allows this deck to activate its leader ability early, and it wants to mainly attack the opponent's leader as well, since being a low life leader means you don't want to drag the game out too long. You need to make sure you end the game before your lower life starts being too scary, which is another huge reason this deck wants to play first. So here we have Nami. Nami's definitely a deck where you should always want to go second. Nothing is more important than reducing the number of cards in your deck, and going second allows you to draw one extra card and move yourself one card closer to ending that game. Plus, you basically never want to attack your opponent's leader with this deck regardless. The only time you should ever do so is with Belmare or Zeph. Milling one card with the Nami leader ability is not something that's worthwhile a lot of the time. So you just want every card possible and every Dawn possible, since you get an extra Dawn going second as well, to defend yourself and play your cards in a manner that lets you defend them as well, and extend the game out as long as humanly possible. So here we have Katakuri, and Katakuri is both yellow decks in general. Both Katakuri and the yellow Big Mom, they're super high on even cost cards, so you always want to go second. And this is definitely one of the decks that is the most swingiest in turn decision or not. There's a lot of decks where these decisions aren't as impactful as they could be. Right, the difference between going first and going second often isn't that huge. But in yellow, the difference between going first and second is often ginormous. The even cost cards you have are so plentiful, but also so powerful, that getting to play Lin a turn earlier or a turn later is often the difference between winning or losing the game straight up. Just the fact that being on even Dawn means you can't play your 4-drop Cracker until you have 5. You can't play your 8-drop Katakuris until you have 9. And you can't play your 10-drop Linlins for the full turn that you're stuck on 9 Dawn. Is so punishing that if I could look at the stats, I feel like this would be one of the decks that is most impacted by the die roll. So here we have Croc, a deck that is near and dear to my heart. It's unfortunate the state that it's in right now, but I feel it's important to talk about it since this deck is likely to get a lot better come OPO4. So Croc is definitely a deck that wants to go first most of the time, but you will take second away from yellow and versus Whitebeard as well. The reasoning for Whitebeard is the same as the reasoning that black decks want to go first against Whitebeard. Croc has a lot of odd cost cards. You have cards like Sentomaru, Doflamingo, Sogeking, and Mihawk, of course, many of which we've talked about earlier. And you want to pressure the opponent's life total just because your leader ability is the most powerful when you have a board advantage against your opponent. If you can press your board advantage against them, then bouncing something, returning it to their hand is actually really effective. If it costs something for them to put it back down, if you're behind on board and bouncing something that's just going to come right back down, that's not very much a winning strategy often. So you want to try and play your cards early and fast, pressure their life total, play your Soga Kings and your 9 drops on curve, and then once you have a little bit of a board advantage, activate your leader ability to put the opponent too far behind to recover. Then lastly here to end the video, we have one of my favorite leaders, the leader that I've definitely played for the longest so far, Captain Kid. Of course, Captain Kid is now mainly the film version of the deck, though there are some other green decks popping up now, of course, like Kinemon. But just like Kinemon, Captain Kid, especially the film version, always wants to go second against every deck. The unfortunate and fortunate part of the deck is that a huge amount of Film Kid's power is based around Film Nami, which is an incredibly powerful card in the fact that it can draw you a card on play and on attack. If it lives for more than one turn, often you just run away with the game with, 7 or 8 cards in your hand for the rest of forever. So being able to play it on 4 and activate it right away to draw a card and get that engine started is just too huge. Also, it doesn't really have access to any early plays, the deck. The only thing you can play early is either Capone's or Jewelry Bonnie, which is better as a 2-drop than a 1-drop most of the time. So that helps being on the draw as well. Of course, Film Brook is a huge play if you're able to play it on your second turn with Dawn going second. And yeah, that's everything here. Those are the main decks that I wanted to talk to you about, and I certainly hope that this is the type of thing that helps you guys think about small decisions like whether to go first or second in any given scenario. These types of things can have huge implications. You should always look at it how your deck is built, and it definitely has huge implications for how you should play the matchup too. Even if you don't get your ideal choice, if your opponent makes a choice that is unideal for your deck, you should still try and make the best of that situation and know what your plan is if you are put in an unideal situation. So I hope that's something you guys will all take into account. And yeah, thanks so much for watching, everybody. Gonna be coming out with more OPTCG University lectures in the future, and you can always catch me streaming and researching and learning and educating as much as I can about this wonderful game in the Twitch channel at twitch.tv/dahalfbreed, where I'm actually recording this right now. Wow. Thanks so much, everybody. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time.